So I now would like to introduce Edith van der Boom, our speaker for this evening. She's the director of the MA in Educational Leadership program at ICS, an associate professor in the philosophy of education and practice of pedagogy. She completed her doctoral studies at the University of Toronto in developmental psychology and education. The focus of her research was the differences in reading comprehension skills profiles among struggling adolescents based on their status of having a learning disability and on being English language not speakers as a first language. So one of those. So Edith has brought to us for the past over 4 years the wisdom of her practice and her research. And we've been very lucky to have her model that for us in the context of our meetings, our classrooms, our institutional life. And you'll get to see some of that here this evening as she walks us through some of the principles of the work. So without further ado, Edith.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. And I'm thrilled to be able to share with you my paper that I've been working on for the last several months, actually. What is Christian about Christian education? I once read a story about a neighborhood with 3 schools, a public school, a Catholic school, and an independent school. As the author described each school, the word she used to describe the independent school was closed. She wrote that this school was only available to those who could afford the required tuition, and the students who went there were taught their own curriculum. She believed that this type of school promoted an insular culture that shielded students from the world's brokenness. I imagine that the independent school could have been a Christian school. However, my understanding of Christian education is that it provides space for children to learn in a Christian context without remaining isolated from the surrounding community. In these schools, the administrators, teachers, and the student body should celebrate and not fear diversity. These radically different perspectives of Christian education make me wonder what needs to change so that our neighbors do not consider Christian schools to be closed. In this paper, I asked the question, what is Christian about Christian education? In order to answer the question, I consider what makes a Christian school distinctly Christian and how the answer to this question might help us understand how to live out our Christian faith in our communities and the world around us today. We cannot care for what we do not love. We cannot love what we do not know, and we cannot know what we do not experience. This statement distinctly captures a fundamental aspect of how I would answer the question, what is Christian about Christian education? It emphasizes the interconnectedness of loving, knowing, and experiencing, so crucial to Christian living, and it highlights the importance of personal connections and empathy in our relationship and understanding of the world. We naturally invest our energy, attention, and resources into the things and people we love. Whether it's relationships, causes, or endeavors, our capacity to love is often rooted in our affections and in our attachments. Since love is intricately tied to knowing and understanding, we tend to develop affection for the things or individuals as we come to know them better. Understanding someone's thoughts, feelings, and experiences can deepen our love and appreciation for them. Knowledge is gained through experience. While we can learn from books, lectures, or other forms of instruction, true understanding often comes from direct interaction, observation, and participation. Embodied learning spaces allow us to grasp the nuances, complexities, and significance of a topic in ways that passive learning cannot replicate. Listening to others' stories sparks our imaginations of what we ourselves have not experienced. This progression of loving, knowing, and experiencing suggests engagement and transformation occur when we integrate these three aspects of what I would consider essential to Christian education. It underscores the importance of active participation, empathy, and the openness in relationships, education, and personal growth. Modern education has been characterized by depositing ideas and beliefs into students' minds to be equipped for various tasks. This model of Christian education should be a practice of lovers of God with a desire to learn to be image bearers of the God to and for the world around them. When teachers see their students as image bearers, it changes everything, including classroom management, curriculum decisions, understanding the teacher's role, and the very purpose of education. In response to this need, I suggest the following integration of loving, knowing, and embodied learning in the development of a distinctly Christian educational experience. Because humans were created to love, focusing on what we love defines who we are. Based on this assumption, Christian education should not just be about acquiring knowledge. Instead, it should be the process by which we teach students to learn to love and understand what they were made to love. Creating a space for students to think about what they love while pointing them to the love of Christ is something that not only needs to be taught, but also practiced. What our hearts desire is not just formed based on our beliefs, but on our practices and our habits. These habits are developed through the patterns of our lives, not just those we learn in school. James K. A. Smith propounds that the competition for Christian education is not public education, but rather the cultural institutions and practices that teach students to love rivals of a true God, something he calls secular liturgies. Such secular liturgies are not just things we do, they do something to us. Our practices inscribe in us habits that default us toward loving something. These can direct us to either God's ultimate love or to something else. Christian education shapes our role in God's story of redemption. Schools where teachers and leadership teams work together rather than independently from one another are signs of a healthy school environment. Our goal should be to work as individuals and participants in an interactive and interdependent community. We should take on more receptive posture to different perspectives, allowing a new idea to generate yet another in us, a process sometimes called thinking. Together, we can co-create communities of belonging. For many parents and Christian educators, a benefit of Christian education is that it teaches students to develop a Christian worldview. Albert Walters describes worldview as the comprehensive framework of one's basic beliefs about things. Worldview is important because it emphasizes that Christian education is not just about bringing souls to Christ, but that God cares for the world itself. Highlighting the shared values between the Christian school and the broader community, such as integrity, compassion, and academic excellence, helps build bridges and fosters mutual respect. In the article, Using Stories and Science to Prompt Thinking About Environmental Sustainability, Nalina Chandra suggests that students in the 21st century need skills that promote the ability to transfer their learning to new and complex situations in an ever-changing global environment. In teaching students about being responsible citizens, they realize that what they do makes a difference in the people's lives around the world. One example she gives is to teach students about fair trade and how their choices in purchasing play a role in the sustainability of farms.
Choosing not to buy a particular chocolate bar may support the sustainability of cocoa farms and pay their employees fair wages. Hearing people's stories helps students imagine what life may be like for others. We make an unfamiliar world familiar by relating to what is familiar to us. By doing this, we can find ourselves relating to people and experiences we do not otherwise encounter. Engaging our students in conversations about what they want to support worldwide can positively affect the actions that they take close to home. Embodied learning spaces allow students to encounter people and their stories in a way that invites them to be changed and experience God anew. It is a space in which students learn to love and to come to know in real and meaningful ways. What distinguishes embodied learning spaces from other learning environments is the practice of hospitality that provides a ground for them. When we think of hospitality, we often consider sharing food, drinks, accommodations, and entertainment. Thought of from an assistant mindset, hospitality includes hierarchy, inequality, and differences, and often leads to paternalism, patronizing superiority, and even discrimination. Instead, pedagogical hospitality involves teachers embracing the vulnerability that comes with welcoming their students and their stories. This is why educators must dedicate time to get to know their students and be willing to humbly adjust their lessons to better meet their students' needs. Hospitality, as such, creates a space in which we ourselves make ourselves available to help one another and to show gratitude for the gift of hospitality we receive from each other. As Christians, the culture of hospitality should come from a belief that every person is an image bearer of God. In her paper, Becoming a World Christian, Hospitality as a Framework for Engaging Otherness, Aminta Arrington describes true Christian hospitality as the acknowledgement of the image of God in every person and the desire to have eyes that see individuals' needs. Students arrive at school with physical, mental, and emotional needs, not just academic needs. A welcoming teacher recognizes and acknowledges those needs, even though the school or teacher may not be able to meet them. The hospitality we want to have practiced in Christian schools allows needs to be expressed rather than diminished or ignored, and cultivates empathy, embodies reciprocity, and leads to transformation. This transformation allows us to see everyone as being worthy of being invited in, learned from, and being in relationship with. Arrington tells the story of some university students volunteering at a center for children with special needs. Instead of framing the interaction between the students as one in which the students from the university are helping the children with special needs, she explains how the encounter is one of hospitality. Contrary to the common understanding of this type of interaction, as one of which the volunteers host the children with special needs, the latter hosts the former. Some parents send their children to Christian schools because they're unhappy with what public schools are teaching their students. While I understand that logic, I wonder if we're guarding our children so tightly that they don't get any experience helping them develop critical thinking skills. What we believe and how we live out our faith does not always line up with the culture of the world. That being said, God calls us to love our neighbor. Encouraging students, teachers, and administrators from Christian schools to engage with the broader community through volunteering actively, participating in community events, and collaborating with other schools on projects helps to break down the barriers and dispels the notion of exclusivity. A flourishing community is one in which everyone feels safe, seen, heard, and respected, where just relationships emerge in a context of hospitality and collaboration. Students arrive into any learning community as whole persons who carry physical, mental, and emotional needs and require much more than filling their minds with knowledge. The gifts students bring include curiosity, stories, and life experiences. When used in the learning community, the teacher must show genuine gratitude for these gifts. New Testament scholar N.T. Wright compares the Bible to a 5-act play full of drama and surprise, wherein God's people are invited to finish the final act through improvisation. Our ability to fill the roles of this drama depends on our willingness to be part of God's story. This means that as Christians, we are called to see how our own stories play a part in God's epic story of redemption and restoration, beginning by understanding what is happening around us, being aware of how people in other cultures have engaged in God's story to create. God has given us each a specific role. Within that role, we are invited to learn and deepen our relationship with God and others. Let's consider what this might look like in Christian education. For Abraham Kuyper, Dutch theologian and politician, every aspect of life is under the sovereignty of God and faith, and those should permeate all areas of a believer's life. He is famously quoted as saying, "There's not a square inch in the whole domain of human existence over which Christ, who is Lord, does not exclaim, 'Mine.'" This means we worship and serve something in all aspects of our lives. In Christian schools, we often refer to this as God's story. As Christians, we aim to serve the living God, all creation. Creation is our story of origin. God created the earth and everything in it. The work he did was good, and he took delight in it. He made oceans and the sky and the land and everything in it. He even made us in his image, not only to look like him, but also to act, work, and create with him. As Adam and Eve were called to subdue the earth, we are also humans created in God's image, called to be co-creators with the Lord of creation. We are to make something with the materials we are given, but more importantly, God asks us to make something of the world in such a way that it reflects his image. The world God made was made for her human flourishing. The fall is our story of brokenness. The biblical story tells us that the world is broken because of sin, which we call the fall. This includes all creation and all humans, both adults and children alike. Human life and culture have been distorted and shaped by adultery. Redemption is defined as the action of saving or being saved from sin, error, or evil, and the action of regaining or gaining possession of something in exchange for payment or clearing a debt. God had a plan to save the world and its people from sin. Redemption is our story of salvation as God sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to come to the earth and to restore creation and redeem all things so that we can get back on track with God's original design in which all creation flourishes. God's story does not end with redemption. He promised to renew the whole world. And so restoration is our story of healing. As God's image bearers, we are called to act, work, and create with him as part of the redemptive work that he is doing. Daily, we must decide how we interact with others and with creation. Our decisions can either support God's redemptive work or they can work against it. Supporting God's redemptive work includes listening to others and becoming conscious of our biases and caring for the world by making decisions that look beyond our conveniences and that consider the value of the world's resources. The analogy of gardening as the work of God's story guides our work of redemption. I have responsibilities such as planting, watering, and weeding before I can enjoy the harvest fruit. As God's co-laborers, we take up our calling to tend to creation while also delighting in its beauty and generosity. Christian educators should consider whether the phrase generous beauty could describe their teaching and shape their students' experience of the world within their classrooms. As Christian educators, we are called to cultivate a learning community that embodies this beauty. David I. Smith and Susan Felch test of educational success is not based on individual economic gain or intellectual achievement so much as growing evidence of holiness within us, justice among us, and healing in creation, all rooted in deep and serious joy. I argue that this is a fundamental difference between public and Christian education. When we think about our classrooms and our schools and how we want them to exemplify the body of Christ, I am reminded that no one person can take on all the control, not even the teacher. Instead, working together and making the most of each other's strengths helps us to move forward in a rich and meaningful way. What would Christian schools and classrooms look like if we invited our neighbors in to partake, not in a way in which our differences create a hierarchy, but one in which we can learn from one another? Grade 4 students at Halton Hills Christian School in Georgetown, Canada, did just that. In March 2019, after the mosque shootings in Christchurch, New Zealand, one of the students asked, "Why did those gunmen want to shoot those people in New Zealand? I bet if they only knew some Muslim people, they wouldn't want to hurt them. They could be friends instead." During the class discussion, it became clear that many of the students did not know any Muslim children. The teacher decided to reach out to a Muslim school in a nearby city and invite them in for some shared time of learning. The Muslim school was delighted with the invitation, as they also had wanted to break down barriers and increase the students' understanding of others. Their day together was a wonderful success, as students played games such as Just Like Me, in which they found many similarities with one another. Students, teachers, and school administrators found that they had more in common than they had differences with one another. This is an illustration of how engaging students in authentic and purposeful interactions with their neighbors is one way to show love and hospitality and embody the true goal of Christian education. In his book, Culture Making, Recovering Our Creative Calling, Andy Crouch challenges us to consider whether we have been called to change the world or to transform culture. He suggests that we should take culture as it is and create more of it. Crouch writes, "So if we seek to change culture, we will have to create something new, something that will persuade our neighbors to set aside some existing set of cultural goods for our own new proposal." Proper understanding of a person or a cultural good requires participation, such as seeking opportunities for collaboration between the Christian school and other schools in the area. Joint educational programs, sports events, or cultural exchanges foster a sense of unity and break down stereotypes. Christian Deeper Learning is a learning framework that supports Christian educators' desire to encourage our students to live out their calling as image bearers and to serve their neighbors and care for creation. Justin Cook and Daryl DeVore write, The pursuit of deeper learning in Christian schools must find its anchor in the role of story as a key design principle. Our curriculum finds its meaning and purpose within God's unfolding story, a story of redemption that invites us to participate, to co-create with God in the restoration of a broken but beautiful and delightful world. Christian deeper learning emphasizes real work for real people who have a real need to connect their stories to God's story of redemption for the world. I offer some examples as models of Christian deeper learning. I share these specifically as they are the ones that have been shared with me, and that to some degree meet the expectations of real work that meets a real need for real people. On a recent visit to Malawi, Africa, an educator told me a story about how students in the northern part of the country were concerned about children in the southern part of the country. He explained that those in the south of Malawi had experienced significant flooding and as a result lost both their homes and personal belongings. The students in the north, while also experiencing poverty, organized a drive to collect clothes for their families and neighbors from their families and their neighbors and donate them to those who had need in the south. They organized this activity for those who had been devastated by the flood. Is this Christian education? A group of grade 5 and 6 students from Georgetown, Canada, published a book about stories of slaves. They donated the proceeds of their book to the International Justice Mission, whose work includes rescuing victims of slavery. Is this Christian education? At the school in Ethiopia, elementary school students learning about stewardship in science class formed an Earth Keepers Club. As a club, they planted trees in the school compound and took on the responsibility of watering them regularly. They were motivated to care for the earth right where they were. Is this Christian education? To help answer the question, who are my historical neighbors and how can we show them love? Grade 7 students in Dundas, Canada, established a relationship with a local museum. The students were doing a unit on structures, so their teacher asked them to talk about old buildings in their town. They heard stories about the buildings, learning what they had been used for and how they are used today. In these stories, they heard about people, the places, and the things of Dundas. The students then chose a person from the earliest days of Dundas and made connections with what they were learning in history about Confederation. Is this Christian education? These same students responded to the question, who are my marginalized neighbor and how can we show them love? By hearing the stories of elderly people who lived in retirement homes. By asking these people to share their stories, they could write and publish a book about their lives and share it with them. The students cared about their writing, spelling, and grammar because it mattered, as their work would be published and shared with an authentic audience. Is this Christian education? When asked, who are my global neighbors and how can we show them love, these grade 7 students from Dundas partnered with Edudeo on a project to learn more about water and raise funds to support a clean water project. Is this Christian education? All of these examples of Christian deeper learning involve teachers and students, each playing a part in the learning community. When they co-create, the learning is rich and meaningful for all. I end this paper by using a metaphor of tree roots to think about Christian education. I love the beautiful story of unity that the giant sequoia trees that grow in California have to share with us. These incredible trees can live up to 3,000 years. They have branches up to 2.5 meters in diameter. Their bark can grow up to almost 1 meter thick. Looking up, you notice that the largest sequoias are as tall as a 26-story building. The average tree measures 31 meters in circumference at its base and has a diameter of 9 meters. One would imagine that supporting that size and weight would require deep roots. The roots of a giant sequoia are relatively shallow, though, as they only grow 1.8 to 6 meters below the soil. Rarely, however, do these great trees fall over. The secret to the strength of the sequoia giants is that they function as a community. Each tree depends on the other trees around them as their roots are intertwined. Their dense network shares support and nutrients, providing incredible strength and stability to these giant trees. These trees grow very close together, and they literally hold each other up. It is because of their intertwined root systems that they can stand firm against fire, wind, earthquake, and storms. What if our classrooms were not just focused on growing deep roots, but also on intertwining our roots with those around us? In Corinthians 12, verse 12 to 14, the Bible talks about one body with many parts. We are called to intertwine our roots with those around us. God intentionally made us different from one another so that we could rely on each other and grow together. Christian education can be so much richer if we focus on God's story, in which we have roles as both culture keepers and culture makers. The idea that creation begins with cultivation is an important beginning step in our living out our calling as God's people of His story that shapes the world, and as we learn to take care of the good things that we already find in culture. Christian education requires careful attention to both the history and to what is currently happening in the world. Small and seemingly insignificant disciplines can have powerful cultural effects. So together with culture making, Christian educators also find themselves culture keeping. Together with their students, they are both creators and cultivators, showing Christ's love through their hearts, their hands, and their heads.
Thank you, Edith. Thank you for, I see callers joining me. Thanking you for your presentation. There are a few questions I have for you, more of interest in your work beyond the paper too, because that's what you're calling us to do. And I want to start with something that you said early on in the paper about embodied learning and imagination. We've had a lot of conversation at ICS about the need to kind of reignite Christian imagination in today's world, and ICS serving a role within that. So I want to kind of just pick your brain on that, what you understand that process to be of cultivating Christian imagination, how it really connects to embodied learning. A lot of what you're mentioning is the connection between stories. So a lot of those connections between stories, imaginations, and practice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I come out of a context of K-12 education. And in my experience, teachers in K-12 schools tend to do a lot of planning in the summer, and then they implement it throughout the year. And what I have found is that you can only do so much planning because you never know who your students are going to be, and who your students are make a difference on what happens in your classroom. And you can't know that ahead of time, even though you may have met the students in the hallway, you might have read their files. If we really believe that each child is an image bearer of God and contributes to the learning in the classroom, then we need to make space for that. And so hearing their stories, hearing about their experiences, and then engaging together as a community is a really, really important of Christian education. And you can't plan for that as much as make space for that. And I talk about imagination because I am sure that many teachers in the summer can't even imagine some of the ideas and some of the activities that actually grow out of the conversations that they have with their students. I've heard stories of teachers like, I had no idea we were going to go this way with this. For example, the one story I told about the students in Halton Hills, where they actually invited students from a Muslim school into their classroom. That teacher never knew that was going to happen. She could never plan for that. And yet that year, what the whole school was doing, they were always responding to the question, what would love require? And that teacher knew, after having a conversation with those students, that love required them opening their doors and making a connection and building relationship.
Thank you. Um, I like the connection between like imagination being a process of really listening. You're flipping that on its head, because I imagine imagination as being a productive act,
Right.
it's out of us, but you're telling us that shaping the classroom according to the stories that come in, listening, it what nurtures that imagination.
Yeah. We don't know what we don't know. And we can't imagine based on just our own ideas. Imagination comes when we're fed by other stories and other people, and we are making connections with them. I think that's a big part of the imagination that I'd like to see in Christian classrooms.
Here, that leads me to the second question I had for you is, I know your research and your writing is about K-12 education, but you inhabit a higher education setting, at a postgraduate school. How do you see those principles that you're talking about adapting um to our setting, like ICS?
Yeah. So in my particular classes, for me, relationship is really, really important. And I talked about that, how teachers need to make time to build relationship in order for community to thrive. And so when I teach a class, I always start the beginning of a class sharing stories, being vulnerable. A typical question for me at the start of a class is, let's share with each other what's one joy and one challenge in your life. And then from that, you hear stories. I've had a student share at the beginning of class, oh, I've been diagnosed with cancer today. Like, sometimes, the stories are shocking. Sometimes the stories, seem really little, but they're meaningful in each person's life. And knowing where each person is at is an important space, because you can't learn unless you're present. And sharing stories at the beginning of class, but also within the context of my teaching, I'm always encouraging students to tell stories. Tell us a story about that. Tell us about your experiences, and then we all learn from that. And then there are times too when we invite what we call expert practitioners into our classroom who have other stories to tell us and to share with us. And then we engage them in conversation as well and can learn from them.
That emphasis on the ecology of the classroom being an environment that is organic, that changes depending on the person, of who is present, who leads, how they lead. That definitely like it resonates with someone like me, who like ICS at the small school, in which we are more exposed to those stories, because we, I mean, by nature of being smaller, we know each other at the Wonderful. Now, different line of questioning. Now, if you're talking about the classroom, but I want about the classroom being a space in which people are cross kind of boundaries of difference. They are learning from the diversity that the classroom itself has. But you begin your paper with a reference to someone perhaps talking about Christian schools being a place that is not enriching itself from the diversity of the world they inhabit. If you would think that,
Yeah. So unfortunately, I can't remember where I read that. It was so striking to me, but it didn't seem significant at the time, but it did because it kept coming back to me. But the idea that a Christian school was thought of as just this closed building that nobody else could get into just really did not sit well with me. When I think of Christian education, I think of, our calling to love God and to love our neighbors. And if our neighbors think that there's no way that they can be part of our community, then we're not doing a very good job of showing love. And so I want to see our Christian schools as actually being involved in their communities and making a difference in their communities. And people saying, wow, it's a Christian school. They're just like, we want to know more. We want to be part of that, right? And showing love to our neighbors means coming out of our schools and into our communities. And the examples I showed you shows that you can do that in many different ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be like literally out of the doors, but it can be. And I think those are just really, really important. I think of another example that I didn't share, and it was a kindergarten class. And I forget who shared the story with me, but she talked about the fact that, in kindergarten class, they teach about vehicles, and they do a whole unit on transportation. And in the winter, the children just really, really had a deep appreciation for the people who were doing the snow plowing, because there was just a lot of snow that year. And in the end, the response for these children was to write a thank you letter for the snow plowers. And they sent, these letters out to the people who were snow plowing their area in the city, and they were so well received because there was this show of appreciation, and there was this connection between these young 3, 4, or 5-year-olds and these people who were out snow plowing the snow in the winter.
thank you. I like that idea of a Christian school being in a space or an institution that listens, that imagines, that acts with the community, and definitely that the classroom models that for the institution for the community, so moves in that direction. And so, thank you.